We are here today as ever with my good friend Richard. Hello, Richard.
Andy, how are you?
Yes.
I must confess to our listeners, we have had a little chat beforehand. So
Yes.
that's the question where I sort of knew some of the answers. And yeah, your life's been exciting again.
Yeah, somebody years ago said, if you follow Jesus, life is going to be exciting. Sometimes the excitement is terrifying. Sometimes the excitement is wonderful exhilaration. And we've had both of those sort of polar opposites almost every other day, it feels like, for the last few weeks. But hey, maybe things are settling down and that would be good.
He does test us that our faith can be, sharpened.
Yes.
And he's, from what it sounds like, he's been testing you.
Yes, I would say so. But we've come through and it's all good. Right. We met last time to talk about the Olympics specifically, but now we're going to move on to the Paralympics. Is this right?
Well, it seemed to me very sensible, bearing in mind here we are in the middle of the Paralympics.
Yeah.
And having very fortunately, from my point of view, come across the article 2 weeks ago on written by a non-Christian on how an amazing number of Olympians are not only have faith but are sharing it. There I am reading another article this week on Paralympians and what they had to say. And of course, they come from a slightly different angle, so but the same faith. So I thought I'd bring it to the listeners today.
Cool. Well, take it away, my friend.
Thank you. So yes, an amazing rise in faith in the Olympics. Those of you who will remember from 2 weeks ago, if you don't, what I said was that a lot of Olympic athletes in the pool, swimmers and divers, but also runners, and even 10,000 miles away, the surfers in Tahiti were giving glory to God. And of course, the picture from the Olympics is of a surfer jumping out the water. How he does this, I don't know, pointing to heaven with an inscription, I can do all things through him who strengthens me, straight from the Bible. And what was interesting, this article was written by a non-believer who said, that we've always known that athletes have had faith. But what's interesting is the greatly increased willingness to share their faith publicly, if you like, to go public is what they believe. So there I am thinking that's great. Now, what about the Paralympics? Oh gosh, I was particularly delighted when I got some information from the Paralympics and faith. I'm going to quote 5 people. And just to remind listeners, because I didn't know this, the Paralympics started just after the Second World War, when there was a sporting competitions involving veterans with spinal cord injuries held at Stoke Mandeville Hospital in 1948. So the Paralympics, although it wasn't called that then, dates back to this sporting competition in 1948. By 1960, it had become international. So it started off just English. By 1960, it had become international. And it was then known as the Paralympics a little bit later on. In 1960, there were 400 athletes from 23 countries. There are now thousands. And there's even, did you know this, a refugee Paralympic team. 8 athletes from 6 countries representing 120 million forcibly displaced people. Wow. Just 6 parasports, but here we are, these 8 refugee athletes. And I was just thinking, oh my goodness, if you are a Paralympic athlete, not a refugee, A, you've had to cope with a disability, B, you've had to be extremely good at whatever you do. What an amazing resilience. If you chuck in being a refugee as well, I mean, it's boggling. How do you do that? Anyway, these are amazing people. Well done. They had to survive war and persecution as well as whatever they had physically. So before I look at the faith in these amazing people, I learned more of the mindset of Paralympians in Sorted magazine, which both Steve and I know about, because Andy and I know about, because our good friend Steve Legg, who runs Sorted. And these Paralympians don't see themselves primarily as disabled. That's something for those of us who are able-bodied to get our heads around. They are not number 1 disabled and number 2 athletes. They are number 1 athletes. That's how they see themselves. And Tatiana McFadden, a wheelchair marathon racer, got loads of Olympic gold medals, sees herself as very able. Indeed, this gets me, and this really puts me to shame. She trains in a gym alongside able-bodied men. This is a woman in a wheelchair training alongside able-bodied men. The difference is she lifts heavier weights. I had to throw that one in. I thought, good on you, Tatiana. I mean, when you watch her do her wheelchair racing, I'm thinking, these guys must have arms like my legs. No, their arms are better than my legs. So there we are. Just thought I'd throw that in as a freebie. Isn't that amazing? She trains alongside able-bodied men, just lives a bit more. So that said, it must still be very tough being a Paralympian athlete. Here's one thing, just get this. Imagine being a blind long jumper. So you're running along the track. You don't quite know when to jump. And there's a sandpit in front of you, but there's concrete either side. And I remember reading about this one man who talked to his guide, having to tell him when to jump, but somehow it went wrong and he landed on the concrete, broke a few bones. I mean, that's rough, isn't it? That is hard to know when to jump. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw those in as some stories. Now I'm going to move on to some faith, because that's why we're here. What is it about the faithful Paralympians that makes them feel like even more amazing than those without faith? We'd said earlier that isn't it heartening as Christians to learn about Olympians that have faith? Well, what about the Paralympians? And they were asked one particular question, and the question was this: how do they process their disability? Do they blame God for their disability? Wow. And this is people who are either born with a disability or maybe had a terrible accident later in life. Do they blame God? Well, here's the first one. And there's a sport called goalball, which I can't quite remember how goalball works. It's a variation on football, goalball. And there's a woman called Anna Sharkey, and she describes herself as frustrated by her disability, but she doesn't blame God. She's always been visually impaired, and that's normal for her. And she's prayed for healing, and God hasn't supplied the healing that she asked for. But she says, just because I've not been healed, that doesn't mean that God is not active in my life. And she says, God brings good from bad situations, because if she wasn't visually impaired, she wouldn't have got involved with goalball, an incredible gift for which she is so grateful. Well, I thought that's nice. Okay, that's so, yes, frustration, no to blame, and she just looks on, not just on the bright side of life, but more than that, God bringing good out of bad situations. It must be very hard being visually impaired. But that's what Anna Sharkey has to say. What about another one? Same question. Do you blame God? Jared Wallace, who is a 100 and 200 meter runner. Absolutely, he says, without hesitation, I do not blame God. In fact, I rejoice with him in my disability, because in my disability, he has made me able. In my disability, he has made me able, and he's made himself even more able in me. This guy is teaching me. I honestly don't know if my faith and strength would be where it is now if this had not happened and I had stayed able. So he's saying his faith has increased because of his disability. And in fact, he sees that himself as being made able by God. Fully whole, actually, we would argue, wouldn't we, Andy, that actually without faith, we're not fully whole.
Yeah.
Saying, actually, I'm more whole, to be honest, than people without faith. Fair play. Jeremy Campbell. And I'm sure Andy's writing some of this stuff down. Number 3, Jeremy Campbell.
I'm captivated more than I'm writing, because it's just amazing to hear.
I'm captivated, and I've written all this stuff down. Jeremy Campbell, pentathlon, discus, long jump. Do I blame God? Absolutely not. I believe he has given me a platform to show just how amazing he is and what he can do. He then quotes 1 Corinthians 1. He uses the weak to shame the strong, the foolish to shame the wise, the things in this world which are nothing to make those which are something appear like nothing. In other words, how God uses the lesser things to make a bigger impact. No blame. He is God. Wow. So no blame, 3 out of 3 so far. Now, interestingly, I only worked this out further down the line, Michael Sharkey. I thought, oh, is that any relation to Anna Sharkey? Michael Sharkey, also playing goalball. When I was younger, I did pray a lot about being healed of my visual impairment. Same sport, same problem, visual impairment. That God would take this difficulty away. There would have been no goalball, and I would not have met my wife. Ah, I spotted it. This is a married couple who met through goalball. I would not have met my wife without playing goalball, without being visually impaired. I certainly do not blame God for afflicting me with a disability. It has been a blessing for the most part in my life. Doesn't say for all my life, but for the most part, it's been a blessing. How humbling is that? There will be some listeners, I think, who maybe are disabled and as well as able-bodied listeners,
Yeah.
I hope both sets of people are getting something from this.
Mm.
Those of us who are able-bodied to learn more what other people are thinking, and those maybe who are disabled to say, oh, perhaps these are role models for faith. And finally, Steph Reed, who I had heard of before. Steph Reed, long jump, and also did dancing on ice. Um, and she has a particular story. She says this, I haven't ever blamed God. I don't think I've ever felt mad at God. I certainly had moments of frustration, but never anger towards God. I still know that God is in control. And then she talks about her accident. If he could save me from an accident, and she lost her foot in a horrific boating accident, so she's an amputee, which was clearly life changing. Um, there's nothing he could save me, in other words, save my life from this accident. Yes, she lost her foot. She could have bled to death easily from that accident. If he could save me from dying from that accident, there's not much else that he cannot handle.
Hmm.
So I've got just a few points to one, if you like, one more paragraph, but really, I think the words are powerful enough to speak for themselves.
Yeah.
I will just give you one more paragraph before I hand over to you. Probably the biggest question someone who is disabled can face personally is the one they've been asked. Do you blame God? Not 1 out of 5, 0 from 5 blamed God. Yep, some people mention frustration. Well, to be honest, even able-bodied people can get frustrated, perhaps for different areas. But not one of them allowed their situation to jaundice their view of life or the creator. In fact, the opposite. They often saw disability in a positive light of the opportunities created and the development of their faith. Above all, they trusted him. And if they can do so in such a major area of their lives, what a lesson to us to trust him in all areas of our lives.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, wow.
I haven't
Totally,
written much.
I'm blown away.
There's a couple of things that come to my mind. One of which is when I did a work experience about 15, 16, I worked in an additional needs school where primarily there were physically handicapped children. And one of the things they did every year was called a wheelathon. It's a bit like a walkathon, but you wheel because they're in wheelchairs or variations of that. And it was about a mile circuit. And they had various aids there. If somebody had no ability to propel themselves, there was a special bike they could sit in their wheelchair in the bike. But they had a pedal cycle. Well, now I cycle quite a bit, especially back then. I thought, well, that's got to be fairly easy. You just got to turn the pedals with your hands. And there was a guy that had turned up, and he comes and helps them and launches their wheelathon, who was a athlete at Olympic level for hand cycling. And I'd watched this, and it is a weird looking thing because it's a bit like it's an odd shape, isn't it? Because it's very pointy at the front. It's got one wheel, and somehow they're turning the wheels and steering it at the same time. I'll have a go at this. It can't be that hard. I cycle. My goodness, I didn't get very far. And I came back again.
How tired were your arms?
I could barely move my arms. They were just aching. It was really painful. And I was what, 15, 16. So I'm relatively fit. I'm fairly young. And okay, I wasn't built for that. My legs what did the work for me, but I think it was just the level of this is quite easy. No, it really is not.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's humbling. The whole thing is
Yeah.
humbling. It's humbling on a physical level, and it's even more humbling on a mental level, but on a spiritual level, oh my goodness. I mean, it is just humbling, simply.
Yeah. I was chatting to a friend of mine, Rachel Murray, who does sign language. And one of the things that she was talking about with me in an interview was when we think of people who are using sign language, we would say, well, they're deaf. They have a disability. And she said, for them, it's not like that. That's kind of the hearing person's label upon them. And they're a community of people and they don't describe themselves as deaf because it's not where they immediately go. But of course, if you've got hearing, then you haven't got hearing. Therefore, you're already making a judgment on stuff.
Standards. And that's why I like the idea that no, we're not primarily disabled. No, we're athletes. And
I,
as you know, if anyone who can move that hand cycle, and you're exhausted. These guys are doing it to win races.
yeah, yeah.
They're athletes.
And I really like it because it reminded me of the community of people who we would describe as deaf, and they wouldn't first describe themselves that way. But it's how we stick a label on it because that's what we like to do as people. We like labels. We like to know that that's an old person and a young person and a disabled person and a deaf person. And actually, those labels are very restrictive, aren't they?
Yeah, and as you say, it all depends on who's labeling.
Yeah. And I'll tell you the other thing that really struck me was more able. I did write that
More
down.
able. Yeah, and it's like almost like a superpower.
Yeah.
And if something enables your faith, I mean, Jesus said, although I'm sure there's an element of hyperbole, if your eye it offends you, gouge it out. If your arm is causing you to sin, cut it off. And the same with your leg. And okay, leaving aside the element of hyperbole, but what he's saying is this: actually, there are things which get in the way in our life of faith. And what these people have discovered, lacking what we might see as something that might help you, whether it's eyesight or an arm or a leg or whatever, actually their faith, it puts ours to shame. And, we need to spend more time with the Lord and developing our faith, not just, I'm going to go for a run today or play golf today or something. How much time are we spending with the Lord?
Mm. I want to come back to the God is more able part to finish, but where I also wanted to go was we've looked at labels and how we think of people. They're deaf, they're disabled, they haven't got a leg, they haven't got this. But I like the fact that these people are just getting on with their lives, and I suppose in a sense they don't think of it like we do. And I think that's the bit that I'm sort of trying to get my head around, is that they don't see a missing limb where I would. But the other part of that is we all have a disability of some sort. I wear glasses because my eyes have an astigmatism there. I can't see perfect without glasses. I would love to run and run really well, but I've had heart issues, so that's not something I can do. So we all have a disability of some sort, but then it comes a much grander question that we can't get into in an hour. Well, what is a disability?
Just as you're speaking, I remember thinking back to my first church here in Margate, where we had a lady, a youngish adult with Down syndrome, and quite a what we would say is medically is a high functioning Down syndrome. And her great joy was to do the lesson in church, and she'd learned to read, and she would stand up with a massive smile on her face. She would read quite slowly, quite loudly, and with a huge smile and giggles, and she would read the passage, and everybody would give her a round of applause because that was a big thing for her. But what I think was really interesting is that we all listened to the passage much more. It was read really well. It was like an event in itself, and she wouldn't see that as a disability. She would think that as, wow, I've read the lesson in church today, and it was more. I'm more able in some ways because of the way God has made me, or He's allowed me to be. And everybody else really enjoyed it and got more out of it as a result. It's a very interesting business. Yeah, much more mysterious and much larger perhaps than we give it credit for.
I'm sure we've said this before, or I've said this before, but I love the piece of scripture where it says God frustrates the intelligence of the intelligent, because we have this, you need to be this or that. I mean, the boy King David, he goes and he kills Goliath, David and Goliath. David was absolutely the worst possible person to go and do that on every single level, except the fact he was the right person.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yes, no, God does work in mysterious ways. He really, really does. And so, yeah, I think we both learned quite a lot, and hopefully the listeners have learned a little bit from, what these five Paralympic athletes are saying, and all, every blessing and go for it.
Right, I want to come back to this one point. God is more able within me, because the scripture that comes to mind is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And we can use that as a battering ram and a baseball bat to say, well, I should be able to do this and I should be able to do that. And we get into the shoulds and the woulds, and that's not great. But actually, when we're serving God and doing what He's asking us to do, when we're trying to use the gift that He's given us for His glory, then yes, He will equip us. But as these, I'm getting it right, these not Paralympian athletes, but these athletes would say, well, they're just getting on with what God's given them to do. It's less of a big deal in a sense, because that's who they are. Whereas we think, oh, almost that kind of thing, oh, bless, look at them having a go. I mean, it is almost like that, isn't it? Which is just so wrong.
It is so wrong. But yeah, I think that I can do all things means all things. Of course, it has to be within God's will.
Yeah.
So I'd like to run 100 meters in 10 seconds. I can't. Never could. Never will do. And that's not God's will for my life. So in the sense, I can't do that because actually that's not His will. But within His will, oh my goodness, yes. And that's why we need to be stretched and to say to God, do more. You've given me these gifts. I open myself up to you. I want to do more with what you've given me. Then I can do all things.
Yeah. I just wanted to finish on that one because it is so, I think, poignant around these men and women who are doing what they do. Like you say, that the refugee, I didn't even know that was a category in there.
I didn't know it either, but yeah, praise God. And they will be representing 120 million people. Wow.
Yeah. Uh,
Wow.
I'm not an athlete. I don't pretend to be. I like the idea of a chair doing athletics, to be honest, because I could just sit down and watch. I like rally more than I do running. But yes, yeah, I'm going to leave it there because there's too much there to go and chew on. If you've got any thoughts on that, are they athletes or are they actually Paralympian athletes? How would you want to describe them? You can think about that perhaps. But if you've got any questions, Dr. Richard Scott, or you've got any topical issues in the news, you're thinking, what's the real story on this? You can email them to us. hello@pure247radio.org. hello@pure247radio.org. I'll put them to Richard and we'll do our best. Well, he will do his best. I will do my bit of asking him to answer the question. Dr. Richard Scott, GP, thank you for your time yet again.
It's been a pleasure as ever.